Alright, Game Bears, it is time for some more unused content and games, and today, now that I have the Pokemon Black Nuzlocke out of the way, it's time to look at unused content in Pokemon Black and White, the fifth generation of Pokemon games, this time set in a far-off New York City-inspired region known for having a bigger emphasis on story and introducing a full set of new Pokemon. Not a single older Pokemon making an appearance before the Elite Four. Aside from Pikachu, can't even be caught in that one area in Castelia City. Yes, you read that right. Alright, so starting off with development history, but before we begin, I do gaming and content like this all the time. If that's your type of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's for free and you can always change your mind later on. So, let us start off with on October 12th, 2024, a terabyte's worth of data from Game Freak was leaked onto the internet by a hacker. Among the leak, the entire source code for Pokemon Black and White was released, containing lots of early and unseen content from this developmental cycle, starting off with the debug menu. The debug menu can be activated without any sort of cheat code. Just press the select button. Note that it cannot be used in battle. The debug menu is broken up into 7 sections, which are documented below. Idea Fly opens the game's map and allows the player to teleport to any major location. Probably is a way to test that. I guess this is all just for testing purposes. Opens a menu that, or for the jump, opens a menu that always crashes the game regardless of what is selected. Alright, because that hasn't been fully implemented in yet, or a scrapped idea. Map Transitions opens a menu listing rooms/dungeons that the player can teleport to. Some spawn the player in an object they can't get out of, or just crash the game. Season Jump, seemingly no function. I guess originally you could change the season on the fly if you needed to for different things. I'm kind of glad they didn't have that. Seems like an easy way to choose certain areas. Our Map Jump opens a glitched menu that cannot be exited without completely restarting the game. And finally, All Map Check. First teleports the player to a gateway area, then teleports them to random beta areas. All the player cannot move or escape. Alright. Coordinate displays information related to where the player is located in the game's map. Clear Camera Manipulation, a tool for moving the player's camera around. Camera front cover displays a technical camera information on the bottom screen. Event Manipulator, seemingly no effect, probably could manipulate certain events in the game. Script Execution opens a menu with a list of the developer's last name, seemingly no effect regardless of option chosen. Allows just blank over here. And model list, I guess, whatever. Allows the player to view various overworld sprites. Light, a tool for changing lighting effects, likely to test out different lightings. Weather, a menu for changing the in-game weather, again for testing. Fog Manipulation, a tool for increasing or decreasing the level of in-game fog. Our bottom screen opens a menu with options pertaining to the camera zooms, the sound, mixing, and more. Field Moves opens a menu with options for Pokemon to ride on/fly with. Move Pokemon opens a menu that enables the roaming legendary Pokemon by pressing X, likely to test them out. It keeps track of their current HP value, status effect condition, and the route each one is currently on. Opens a tool for changing the values of the colors on screen, and it's just a minus for some reason. And Encounter Effects opens a menu that plays the animations for entering battle, depending on which option is selected. This is likely all done just for testing purposes, though, as I mentioned before. Now, this one and this little unused video series is going to be quite long because, oh boy, there are a fuck ton, and I mean a fuck ton of unused sprites. Starting with, I bet you guys never expected a blonde Grimsley. He was supposed to be blonde originally, which is hilarious. But starting off with some player sprites, and I'm going to skim through these pretty quickly because goddamn there's a lot of them. And I'm not going to, there's a lot of dialogue on the side over here, I'm not going to read all that. Feel free to pause the screen though if you need to read that. Alright, the player sprites were originally combined, both male and female. Used the same set of sprites. The base was Lucas from Platinum's Platinum Sprite, but then shifted over to generic yet unique girl characters. The actual first version of a male player came about in the 4th revision, which begins in the table below. For the last 2 revisions here, oddly, the unique running sprites that were made were replaced with copies of the walking ones in R3507, but with a tiny group of pixels at the top right. And here's all the different sprites. I could click on them, but it would take forever if I did that, so here's that. Yeah, and they just got a generic, youngster and female sprite over here. Alright, for Hilbert over here, this is the change of all his sprites over the years. This sprite actually looks kind of similar to the youngster sprite we do see in the game. That's orange in color. It's just a bit of a darker orange color. And we got a monochrome version of that as well. And then we can kind of see here different parts of the design getting into his final design over here. And for the final design, this design kind of makes it look like he has a beard and some sideburns. If you look closely, you can kind of see it on some of these sprites. Alright, now here's the sprites of him on his bike. Maybe I'll read some of the dialogue if it's short enough, but I'm definitely not going to read all of it. But yeah, receiving biking sprites fairly early on. Surprisingly, the original motion to the animation was a little different, leaning more forward when pedaling. Using HMs, the only difference is very minor shading changes on top of his hat. In fact, this sprite doesn't even have a hat. I always wonder what, like, obviously just a placeholder sprite, but it looks a little funny with all the pink hair. Alright, for saving the game, minor shading changes on the hat again. Balancing on Route 6, I believe. It seems the bouncing animation originally had the player swaying back and forth instead of bouncing on a single foot. Yeah, I prefer what they did in the final. That wouldn't look as good if they were just swaying back and forth. The early swaying sprites are heavily pixelated, indicating they simply rotated the sprite instead of redrawing them from an angle they appear at. Again, likely as a way to test out before they decided to finalize what they wanted to do. One frame was actually removed, but was added back later the same day. That's kind of funny. Alright, fishing sprite. November's revision palettes wasn't updated, but a fixed version is provided here regardless. Using the Pokemon Center, early designs take the Pokeballs out of the opposite side, like in Platinum. Again, prefer what they did in the final version. The right side is always right. Alright, early design's mouth is open. For whatever reason. Oh, I found it! You guys can't see it, but my mouth was open too. Alright, for some reason Hilda was originally going to have this darker hair color. I prefer the brown that she has in the final game. Like Hilbert, Hilda started out as a generic red girl. That's orange, but okay. Unlike Hilbert. However, her early design didn't differ too much from the final. Her hair changed color a couple of times, and the design of it was originally tweaked. The change to brown was a very late change. Aside from that, the only other major difference is that the Pokeball symbol on her hat was originally filled in. Alright, and here's what that looks like. And notice how the Pokeball symbol is filled in with a little bit of a bluish color, which is kind of interesting to think about. Alright, next up, her cycling sprites. Same general changes as the rest of her sprites. Are using HMs. As with her other sprites, her bag switches sides. With saving, the same design changes as her other sprites. Alright, and for balancing, as with Hilbert, balancing seems to have originally had the player sway back and forth like a rotating Super FX sprite. This was dropped before 2010. Alright, for the surfing sprites, same design changes as other sprites. Oddly, she started out using Dawn's Platinum sprite as placeholders, then swapped to using her Diamond Pearl sprites, with a broken palette instead. Here's what that looks like. Even Dawn's Diamond Pearl sprites look a little discolored, if you will. Hilda's better than Dawn. Fight me. What can you do? That's just my opinion. But anyways, now the fishing sprites. Her poses for fishing facing forward and backwards. Swapped the sides she leaned on. Alright, using Pokemon Center. As with Hilbert, the side she takes her Pokeballs out swapped. But it's not until very late in development, when her hair changed to brown. Alright, and finally, obtaining items. Her hair on the side was given a small animation of flopping out a little bit. Alright, and that's enough of the player character sprites. Next up, unique NPC sprites. Gym leaders, rivals, professors. Oh my, whatever they mean by oh my. Alright, I'm not going to read all these once again. Feel free to pause for a bit if you'd like to, since this is just a lot of dialogue is why I'm not going to read it all. But here's some of Jaren's beta sprites. Prefer his final design because his head's looking kind of flat here. Though I think his outfit looks a bit better than the final game, I'd argue. Alright, here's Bianca's unused sprites. I kind of like some of her little beta sprites she has over here. Heck, I kind of prefer this sailor-like hat design compared to her hat in the final version. And I can read this one. This one's short enough. Bianca has a change of color for her hat, going from mostly white to mostly green, while also ditching the bow. The only revision to her early design adjusts the position of her hands. And they're adjusted alright. Alright, next up the mother's designs. Which, this design over here kind of looks like the teacher design that's seen in-game. I'm kind of glad they changed it to something a little more unique. The player's mother went through a couple of design changes, most of the differences being her hair design and clothes. She gains a hairband for her final design. Alright, Professor Juniper's beta designs. Make it look more like a generic teacher character once again, and apparently originally she was going to be a dude, or again, it's probably just a placeholder. Alright, Professor Juniper did indeed start out as a random man, as was stated in an interview. First revision adjusted her leg proportions slightly and redoes most of her shading. The next revision completely redraws her sprite, giving her a bigger lab coat and a more detailed hair. A revision after that tweaks some more sprites and changes her lab coat from green to blue. Final versions makes her hair slightly shorter. And here's what all that looks like. But yeah, I think originally she was going to be a male professor, I guess, just like all the previous professors before her. But they decided to make her female, as she is the very first female professor in the Pokemon games. At least in the games. Not exactly the anime, though. Alright, Cedric, her father. Alright, Cedric was built off of Professor Juniper. Kind of makes sense. His early sprite depicts him as much taller and with slightly different hair. Alright, here's what that looks like. He's definitely more of an old man here than his more middle-aged looking self. Alright, Looker. Funny how Looker had different designs despite showing up in the Gen 4 games. Huh. Alright, Looker went through a few different placeholder sprites, including a unique early sprite, or design, from an accordion player that wasn't actually used in the accordion player's files once that NPC was added to the repository. He originally simply used his sprite from Platinum, then gained unique ones in the next reversion. R18328 makes a small adjustment to his tie and his sideways sprite. And it looks like he originally used the veteran sprite as well. At least a different version of it. Alright, Cynthia. Even though she has a Gen 4 design, so I don't know why they tried to change this here. Again, likely just a placeholder. Use her sprite from Diamond and Pearl at first until changing it up a little bit, since the sprites in the Gen 5 games are a little different from the Gen 4 ones. And a little more detailed, so I'm kind of glad they did that. But again, likely it's just a test at first. Alright, Emmett, one of the subway bosses, went through a few different color schemes and redraws, although the general design remains the same. Earliest designs give him reds on the fronts and yellows on the back before shifting to just red and gray, and then to blue and gray. Last red revision depicts him with his mouth open. Here's what that looks like. And once again, he's just a random dude here initially. And then he gets like a white version of the conductor trainer class. Same with his brother Ingo, but with black. I like his brother. His early design incorporates red instead of blue. Sprites were redrawn a couple of times. Alright, next up, the gym leaders. We have Silent over here. His design stayed the same, unlike his siblings. First revisions makes very minor tweaks to his eyes. Second one brightens his hair. And final gives him his apron and adjusts his stance while bowing. To give him that restaurant look, of course. Alright, Cress, his brother, the water type one. Started out as a recolor of Silent, likely just as a placeholder, before getting his own unique sprite 10 days later. Exactly 10 days later. His early sprite matches the September 2009 concept art from him and the other gym leaders, having a different hairstyle. This early design received a single revision, which adjusted his hair farther and changed his color. Revisions after that give him his final design, and from there, only minor tweaks are made. Alright, here's what that looks like. And once again, kind of reusing some of Hilda's old sprites before she got her recent design. Or more design changes. And notice how Chili is spelled with 2 L's instead of 1 here. Alright, started out as a red recolor of Silent before getting his own sprite, which matches his early design of concept art. His early design got a single revision, tweaking his hair design and color, and then received his final design in the next revision. Alright, so that looks like here. His hair kind of looks similar to Mayleen's hair, the fighting type gym leader from the Gen 4 games. Just wanted to point that out. But notice how they kind of use Silent's design over here, showing who they made first of the 3 brothers. Alright, next up, Lenora. Alright, I'm not going to read all that here, but here's what the look of her sprites looks like. Lenore also did get censored in certain versions of the game, but I neglected to bring that up in the playthrough. But yeah, that she kind of lacks her apron in certain parts of her sprites here, and that's noticeable. Alright, next up, Berg. Once again, that's a bit of long dialogue, but here's what his sprites look like. He's got this long hair here in this different design. That's interesting. And then you got this weird purple suit. Kind of reminds me of, I forgot what his name, Tucker from the Battle Frontier in Pokemon Emerald. Kind of looks like him. Next up, Elisa. Originally, Elisa was going to have her legs showing instead of wearing black leggings, as you can see in her sprites here. Alright, Elisa started out with an early design that had no leggings and different headphones. I think I prefer the leggings, personally. It just makes her design look more complete, let's just say. The first revision of the design appears chibi-like, with unrealistic proportions. This chibi design then got a revision almost 2 hours later to add walking frames, and was then changed a week later to fix the proportions on it. Her final design would be added in April 2010. Alright, and here's what that looks like. Alright, next up, Clay's beta design. He was originally going to use the Fisher design, it looks like. Interestingly, internally, the first couple revisions of Clay refer to him as Leader 7. I guess originally he was going to be the 7th gym leader instead of 5th, suggesting he swapped places in the game with Bryson. It would have made sense for Driftveil City to be the Ice Type gym, since that is around the route where you can find Vanillites. It would make a little sense. Though not Crogonals or Cubchoo/Beartech, but whatever. And I meant to say Vanillite, not Vanillish, but you get what I mean. First couple of revisions reveal he was built off of the Fisherman sprite. His early design matches his concept art, which depicts him with and depict is spelled wrong here, but whatever, with a different face and slightly different outfit. Future revisions first finalize his outfit and change his face until the final angry face appearance, as well as adjusting his hat a little bit. Final versions fix an out of place bit of white on his front facing sprite. And here's what that looks like. Alright, next up, Skyla, everyone's favorite flying type gym leader. And I can't disagree with that. Skyla's first proper revision has her appearing with her September 2009 concept art design. However, this situation is strange. By October 2009, she already has a battle sprite, which was this design but light-skinned, and with blue colors in her hair. The reason for this discrepancy is unclear. Regardless, it receives a single revision, which cleaned up her sprites and fixed her proportions so she doesn't look like a pencil. The next revision, a month later, introduced her final design and is darker hair than the final. Aside from that, only minor tweaks were made in each revision afterwards. Alright, here's what she looked like, especially this here. She kind of looks like a dark-skinned Zinnia, if you will, with that outfit. Just wanted to point that out. Do like the slightly lighter hair color as well. Alright, we got Bryson. Actually, this design of Bryson goes hard. I like this. But anyways, as mentioned before, internally, Bryson was initially referred to as Leader 5, suggesting he was originally going to be the 5th gym leader, meaning he likely swapped spots with Clay at one point in development. His first proper sprite shows him in his concept art design, and his design got a couple of revisions for polish before it was replaced with the final one. At that point, it was only minor tweaks until the final, which brightens his outfit colors a bit. And finally, well, technically not finally, we still got one other gym leader, but yeah. We have Drayden's sprites. Our early sprites have slightly different proportions. Final version makes some slight changes to his hair. And here's what that looks like, especially this massively different design we've got over here for Drayden. Alright, next up, our Dragon Queen, Iris. Alright, the revision numbers for Iris look off because Iris technically had two scratch pad files. She was the original 8th gym leader file before Drayden was added, and she was split off into a separate file, obviously for white version. Now leaving the original gym leader 8 file unused. However, even after the split, it got a revision, which is why the revision numbers go backwards at one point. The scratch pad that was committed to it was in between the two most recent pads at the time. The first scratch pad had its alternate unused palette merged into the pad instead of being provided separately from ease for viewing the extra sprites in the pad. Iris's earliest sprites are much larger than her final ones. And she does look a bit taller, actually, now that they pointed out. And her hair looks much slimmer. Also, she has a bit of a maid design going on here. I'm just realizing that. But anyways, and has a very slightly different hairstyle and outfit. The revision that adds walking frames from her early sprites also tweaked the shading on her face a bit and changed her eye color. And here's what those look like. Originally using the maid design as a placeholder. Alright, next up, the Elite Four. And for some reason, Bianca is a placeholder sprite for Chantal. Funny. And then purple Bianca. Heh! Anyway, Chantal's second scratch pad has its alternate unused palette merged into it for ease of viewing the extra sprites provided in it. She was seemingly based off Bianca, or Bianca was used as a reference during the making of her sprite. I can't really see the resemblance, I'll be honest. Next up, Blonde Grimsley. And they used this weird Elisa sprite as a placeholder. So that's probably why Grimsley was originally going to be blonde, going based off of Elisa's sprites. Or beta sprites, more specifically. Grimsley's second scratch pad has its alternate unused palette merged into it for ease of viewing. The extra sprites provided into it. He was originally blonde, it seems, and it was the only change, making his hair black instead of yellow. Don't make any, black and yellow jokes. Let me not. Alright, Marshall. His shirt was originally green before being changed to teal. Actually, I kind of prefer the green shirt. It looks better. Y'all know me. I like the color green. And finally, the best of the Univoli for, in my opinion, Caitlyn. Caitlin's second scratch pad has its alternate unused palette merged into it for ease of viewing. The extra sprites provided in it originally had sparkles of psychic energy along her psychic hearts, which might have been removed due to looking awkward when not in motion. Alright, 3 early sprites are present below and use one of her first proper scratch pads, which have extra sparkles, but not as many as the used sprites. They could have just kept those sparkles being animated. I think that would have been a good way to fix that. And once again, just like Chantal, she uses some of Bianca's sprites as a placeholder. Alright, and Champion Alder. For some reason using a youngster-like design originally as a placeholder. He originally had a green poncho instead of a yellow one. Honestly, once again, the green one looks better, I think. Contrasts with his colors better. His mouth was visible, and the back of his hair was much darker. Alright, here's what that looks like. Darker hair color, I think, looks better than what we got in the final. And this weird, smirky-looking grin he's got. Alright, and apparently he has his own surfing sprite as well. Maybe originally he was going to have a surfing animation at some point in the story. First scratch pads has alternate unused palettes merged into it, seemingly using Hilbert sprites as a base. Next up, the grunts. Revision adjusts the repositioning of arms, making the X on the heads more pronounced, and making the shading lines on the top much thinner. Some earlier sprites are present, such as the early flag, versions of the grunts with different eye colors, and one seemingly holding a gray shield. Why is he holding a shield? Whatever, I'm kind of glad they took that in the final. There was no reason for that to be there. Alright, and now for the female sprites. First revision had the X bigger, adjusted part of the lower part of the outfit and tweaked the hair a little bit. Second revisions made the shading line on the top thinner, adjusting the eyes and slightly changed the arm poses for the front and back facing sprites. Alright, the 7 Sages. Alright, first up, all Sages initially shared a base design. Each one was made more unique for the final game, for obvious reasons, so to differentiate them. His hat was made smaller, the perspective on the sprite changed, and his color went from orange to red. It's more of like a brownish red color, I'd argue, and this is more of a brown than an orange. Our first revisions close his eyes, and the second one opens them again with a different outfit color, more hair, and a smaller hat. A final revision has some minor outline tweaks around the face. Alright, first revision gives him more hair, second one darkens his outfit colors and makes his hat smaller. Final version is minor shading changes around the face. Our first revision gives him more hair, but then the second revision takes it back and changes his outfit color to a green-brown, or a brown-green. And the hat was made smaller, too. You know the deal. Alright, here's what that looks like. I kind of like this tealish blue color they got going on here. Alright, first revision removes his mustache. The second one changes his outfit color to red, and the third one completely overhauls his design to give him back his mustache, giving him rosier or bushier eyebrows. The hair and the color changes his outfit color to brown. Our mustache was removed, he was given a unique hairstyle, and his outfit color changed to a dark lavender. Alright, bottom left, for the Shadow Triad. Bottom left for their first scratch pad features some poses with their arms in different positions. That's what that looks like. Hope they have the same walking animation. Alright, I like how someone gets his, what am I called, sprites, use some of the other sage's sprites, and with his color. Originally started off as a red-robed sage. First proper scratch pad of his final design features sideways sprites that show a little bit of his hands. And contains more unused sprites at the bottom and show slightly more of his hands as well. Some minor detailing on his robes were also changed a couple revisions later. A later scratch pad features some new unused sprites at the bottom of him raising his hand differently compared to the final. Here's what that looks like. And originally, Gutsus was just going to be some random old man. Alright, I'm not going to read all this. If you want to pause, please do. But here are some of N's unused sprites. Originally, he was going to have a brown hat, it looks like. I like this hat more. Alright, and then we have Antha and Concordia's unused sprites. Features some sprites of her sister. You mean his sister? His sisters, I should say, but whatever. Showing that they are compatible with each other's palettes. Or I guess they use some of Concordia's sprites over here as a placeholder, something like that. Alright, feature some of her sister sprites, showing that they are compatible with each other. I guess they're based on each other's design in some way. They are sisters, after all, makes sense. Alright, those sprites are now out of the way. Next up, let's look at some common NPCs. Alright. The shirt color for the little boy over here. Shirt color was changed to a darker red, and then the sprites were redrawn. Second scratch pad has an alternate unused palette merged in for the ease of viewing. For the female preschooler, I went through a few different design differences, from red and blue to a pure blue to yellow, and then back to blue. The second to last scratch pad has its unused palettes after merging for ease of use. Here we've seen that for ease of viewing, the extra sprites provided into it. And for some reason used some of Hilda's sprites. Alright, now for the Youngster class. It includes an early battle sprite of the Youngster's Trainer class. The battle sprite uses an alternate unused palette that has been merged into the pad for ease of use. We've seen that. Originally had a lighter blue shirt and slightly different hair. Includes an early battle sprite for the male school kid trainer class. The battle, yeah, we already know that part. I won't say that every time. Just shorten it a bit. Hey, yeah, here's those sprites. Our middle version has an incompatible palette. Here's what that looks like. That looks a little weird. Alright, the twin girl trainer class was originally dressed in yellow clothes with a matching bow before switching to blue. That was then later redesigned completely. Includes an early battle sprite of the twins trainer class. Then, you know, the just about unused palette and being merged. The second scratch pad has an alternate palette merged in for ease. Alright, don't need to repeat that. Alright, I won't be reading that. Just pause if you need to. Here's an early sprite of the schoolgirl sprite. Next up, the last. Includes an early battle sprite of the last trainer class. The battle sprite uses an alternate unused palette that has been merged into the pad for ease of viewing. The same scratch pad is also a sprite left over for the early Pigtail Girl NPC design. However, it's not an exact match to the previous showing of the sprite. The dresses she wears in the sprite differs from the dress from the previous appearance of the sprite, suggesting that it could have been used as a design for the NPCs at one point, or was being used as a base for the final sprite. And notice this huge sprite difference over here, compared to the one we see in the final game. It includes an early battle sprite for the female school kid trainer class. The battle sprite uses an alternate, yep, we know that. Second to last revision adds a white line along the bottom of the dress, equivalent to the one her battle sprite got. The trainer sprite in the scratch pad was not updated with this change, however. Alright, only used placeholder sprites. Early revisions of our final design do not exist yet. For the female lady class. Alright, for this design over here, I'm not going to read all of that. Just pause the video if you'd like to read it. Alright, next up this one. This one was originally dark blonde with a pink shirt. Some earlier sprites of the purple shirted design can be seen at the bottom of the scratch pad. In terms of revision for the purple design, there's only slight shading changes on the hair in some frames. Alright, originally wore a yellow shirt instead of an orange one. Final versions touch up his face and hair in the sideways sprite. Alright, do note that the first scratch pad includes R5078, dated July 9th, 2009. How funny, at the time of recording this is July 9th of 2025. Originally wore a red shirt. His face was redesigned slightly. He needed that redesign, he looks pissed. Wonder what happened. I went through a couple of different designs, starting as a brown-haired woman with a purple shirt. The other early designs is a pink-shirted woman with a blue hair, which also serves as placeholder design for many NPCs during development. Alright, once again, not going to read all that. If you'd like to read it, please pause. And I think I'm going to do that for more of these for the rest of this vid. Alright, we have the preschool teacher, or the nursery aide. For short lines like this, I could still read, though. It includes an early battle sprite of the nurser T. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to say nursery. Aide trainer class. The battle sprite uses an alternate unused palette that has been merged into the pad for ease of viewing. Right, early sprite of the middle-aged woman. Here's another one for the middle-aged woman. Alright, here's an early design for the older man design. Or the old man design, I suppose. Early version of the gentleman design. I received only minor changes, such as making his mustache gray instead of white and removing some of the darker shading under his hat. The white mustache looks better. Early design of the old lady. Early design of the socialite trainer class. Her hat was repositioned and was made to appear on both sets of sideways sprites. It does look kind of weird on the left side over here without it. Alright, straight from placeholders to final. For the scientist, the male scientist. Then we got the hot female scientist. The first design has her with a slightly different hair color and style, matching her battle sprites at the time. After the final design is introduced, a revision was made to some of her sideways sprites to make them identical to other sets of sideways sprites, even though her design isn't symmetrical. Alright, the breeder, his belt and fanny pack were adjusted. The female breeder, straight to the final design for the placeholder. Next up, the male backpacker. This inverted color looks really bad. I'm glad they changed that. He has a bit of a different expression here as well. Alright, the female backpacker. Alright, the hiker. First proper scratch pad of him features even earlier sprites with a different face and no gear on his back. And the more final looking sprite in the scratch pad also differs from the final in some small details and proportions. Alright, the businessman trainer class. The maid trainer class. Final version tweaks some very minor details at the bottom of the dress from the front facing sprites. The janitor trainer class. Final version tweaks his hair proportions and shading slightly. Next up, the waiter. Had very slight proportion changes, and early sprite is present near the bottom, showing him holding a cloth in his hand. Honestly, that would have been nice to see in the final version. Small thing, but yeah. The waitress trainer class. Final versions fix the appearance of her apron on the dress and her sideways sprite. Alright, the pilot trainer class. Straight to the final design from placeholders. Music people. With the accordion guy. We got the dancer trainer class. We got the flute trainer. Well, not exactly a trainer class, but the flute person. The only change the fiddle, or I guess the fiddle, player saw were very minor shading tweaks at her feet and next to her baton. I'm pretty sure this sprite is only seen in Annabelle Town and Village Bridge, if I remember correctly. Alright, Grass Whistle, now you're all put to sleep. Player only saw some minor detail tweaks to the leaf and some pose changes. His head was also later made to slide off side to side while playing. Makes sense. It's there for the small bit of immersion. Alright, this was seemingly based on the fiddle player. Only changes are a whole bunch of very minor detail tweaks, as well as brightening his hair slightly. Alright, the guitarist, or the musician, originally wore black opaque glasses. A sprite of him without his instrument is also present. He was made to stand up completely in the final version, so it looked like he's sitting down, or kneeling over. And he was wearing black glasses as his dark side moves are powered up. Alright, the flute girl, seemingly based on the fiddle player. Changes include some tweaks to her hair size and details, as well as flipping her horizontally at one point. Alright, the roughneck. Alright, middle scratch pad includes a couple of early sprites of him with a different idle pose and either a unique pose with his leg out or a part of a bizarre early walking cycle. Alright, the bikers. Early sprites have him with more saturated hair colors and a completely different bike. Final versions remove his undershirt to match with his battle sprite. Alright, the Baker trainer class. The Umbrella Lady trainer class. Surprisingly not called Parasol Ladies like there are in other games. Guess they wanted to make it a little different. And notice how the pink color here is a bit of a deeper peachish color before this final pick design we have. Alright, the Clown, or the Harlequins, as they're called in the game sequel. First revision tweaks the perspective on all sprites. Then the next makes his arms stretch out farther. Alright, next up the Worker. Originally wore clothes to cover his mouth. Which in my opinion, small design change, but it looks a little better. You would want to have like a scarf to cover your mouth in cold weather, so it makes sense. But they changed it. Alright, the Underground Worker trainer class. Helmet was originally a bit more red. A final tweaks some very minor details and removes a white piece of the backside of his belt. Next up, the Doctor. The final design straight from placeholder, no design revisions were found. The Nurse trainer class. Design was basically finalized immediately, except for a very late design change in development that added a lot more shading detail and made her ponytail a little bit smaller. Alright, the Psychic trainer class, the male one. Next up, the female Psychic class. Changes match the male versions and aligns with the change made to her battle sprite. The only actual changes outside of palettes are minor hair shading adjustments. Next up, the male fighter class. Alright, design was seemingly finalized a lot sooner than his battle sprite, which wasn't made until a few months into 2010. Final versions cleans up the sprites and adds a lot more shading details. Alright, the female fighter trainer class was completely redesigned along with her battle sprite. The overall sprite seems to differ from the early battle sprite, as they lack the bun on top of her hair. The final design got a revision, which brightened the colors of her clothes slightly. I kind of like this little bit design here. This looks pretty neat. Alright, the Fisherman final version adds some details to his jacket, brightens his color of said jacket, and tweaks some minor details here and there. Alright, both the male and female ranger, both rangers were finalized straight out of the gate. No revisions were found. We got the male swimmer. Alright, we got the female sorter of the bikini lady. Literally an exact same change as the male swimmer. Features in some scratch pads are the more detailed water around her, but without the splashes. Now they could have the splashes in there, just keep them animated. That's how you fix that. Alright, Depot Agent was built off of the pilot. Makes sense, it's literally just a green pilot. The only changes he got here were very minor shading changes to his hat. Alright, the Policeman was originally a bit slimmer with a different face. The first proper scratch pad has a couple extra sprites with slightly different proportions and arm positioning. Alright, next up the Ace Trainer, the male one. Changes include a tiny bit of detail being added to his belt, and then several shading and post tweaks all throughout. Now the female Ace Trainer. A tiny bit was added to her belt, and then her sideways sprite has some shading adjustments around her face. Next up, the male veteran. First proper scratch pad features an early front-facing sprite and his hands either in his pocket or behind his back. Show that he's real skilled. And for some reason, this unused sprite uses a different color of the male breeder. Alright, here's the female veteran. First proper scratch pad of her has two early sprites that show her with her sunglasses in different proportions. A final version removes most of the red on the bottom of her coat. Alright, baseball player sprites were finalized immediately, and then unnecessary sprites were dummied out. Alright, basketball player, only difference to final is some slight shading on the hands and arms. Alright, the football player sprites were finalized immediately, and then unnecessary sprites were dummied out. Alright, tennis player, sprites were finalized immediately, and then unnecessary sprites were dummied out. Alright, so it's the same thing for the soccer player. Male cyclist. The awesome female cyclist sprite. Just wanted to put that out once again like I did during the playthrough. Alright, the sunglasses man, with this weird looking sprite over here, started off as what appears to be a very different character with an odd design. A revision of him doesn't even have him wearing sunglasses at all. Yet he was called Sunglasses Guy. Funny. That looks close to the Generation 6 painter design, actually. Alright, Man in Black. Now referencing the movie. Alright, the shop clerk was originally a very blue person, very blue, before obtaining his final design. There were some small proportion and shading tweaks made, but he was actually given walking frames before they were replaced and dummied out. Since we don't ever see one of these guys walking in the final game, makes sense. Final version has some hand position adjustments made to the female worker class. Alright, PC workers. Our Nurse Joy here our Pokemon Center worker, went through quite a few revisions, and started out with a fairly basic looking design that boasted more purple colors. Actually, the purple looks kind of nice, I like this. Then pink. Her bowing frames would be tweaked a few times. Some extra details added and polished, and then she'd get another color change to a more reddish pink. The design was finalized almost immediately, and only a few minor cleanups and adjustments made for this other Pokemon Center person. Alright, another one was originally green-haired, recolored for the previous Pokemon Center worker above. This design appeared in previous games. Ultimately, she was given brown hair and a different hairstyle instead. Likely this design was in the Generation 4 games, including some sprites of the female Wi-Fi staff member and unused alternate blue palette. And one sprite has him doing a pose similar to the female staffer, with both hands clasped in front of him. Likely that's just a placeholder. Alright, and here's the female Wi-Fi Pokemon Center worker. Alright, here's another worker. I think with the gate attendants between routes. Scratch pad contains a sprite of the male informant that lacks a hat, and also containing an alternate unused sprite that gives him a rather different color scheme. Likely because this is based on one of the other male sprites, and the female informant. Alright, one scratch pad contains a couple of different designs for the hat, one being much flatter than the finals. And finally, the delivery guy for whenever you need to get a mystery gift. And I haven't seen that sprite in a while. But anyways, used to do mystery gifts all the time back in elementary school. Good times. Like with the old movie Victini, for example. Started out as being a yellow reskin of the male informant NPC. Contains a unused alternate palette that lacks the shine shading on top of the box and makes his outfit a slightly darker shade of blue. Here's what that looks like. Oh, that's all the sprites I could find for the NPCs. And now, as for the Pokemon sprites, as well as object sprites, we're going to save those for the next episode, because there's a lot of really good sprites here. Until the next episode, though, for those who might not know, I want you to guess which Pokemon sprite this might be. Not a question of the day, I just want you all to guess. But anyways, that'll be it for part 1 of unused content in Pokemon Black and White. If you all enjoyed this and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. And consider leaving a comment below and answer the question of the day. Of all the unused content we went over so far, what would you like to see in the final game and why? Yeah, I guess some of the unused sprites like Blonde Grizzly would have been kind of funny. Not fitting but for a Dark-type trainer, but funny nonetheless. That's what I think. I'll see y'all in part 2 where we look at the Pokemon sprites next, and a lot of unused sprites because there's a lot of really cool ones that I've found. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and have a berrific day.